Good morning again. We've been in this series. We've kind of been jumping around the Gospel of John. Uh, First, I followed the miracles and the signs in the Gospel of John, and now we've been going through the I am statements in the season of Easter. The whole focus of the I am statements in this series has been to see what Jesus says about himself, to see who we're called to be in following Jesus. Um, and we've been in this series, and I've been jumping around the Gospel of John in different series, but my hope is that as you see these different themes that John lays out, that you go back and read the Gospel of John, recognizing how all these things connect together. That the I am statements, the way that John uses the miracles, the way that John uses the feasts and to provide context, that I'm hoping as we teach through the Gospel of John, you're recognizing more depth that you can go to. That if you just read John on the surface, you're going to get a lot out of John, but John writes with layer after layer after layer. So that the more you read the Gospel of John, the more you'll know Christ and who you're called to be as one who follows Christ. And so we're in this I am series, and I haven't said much about what the I am actually is. We've just kind of been going through the teaching. And so I want to stop just for a moment to say, John's using a very specific language, and Jesus is articulating his identity in a very specific way. That when you go back to Exodus chapter 3, and Moses is before God, manifest in the burning bush, and he says, well, they're arguing about whether or not Moses is going to go and free the people. He says, well, who are you? And God says, I will be who I will be. He says, I am. And there's different ways that I am is written in the Hebrew and the Greek, and but it's written in a way that I exist, I was, I am, and I will be. And the Hebrew writes it in this future tense, and the Greek writes it in a present tense of I am. But the name of God is supposed to be I am. I just exist. I was the same yesterday, I am the same today, and I am the same always. And so when you're looking at a world of chaos that is ever changing, remember you have a God who never changes, a God who is consistent, a God who always shows up. And the way this is articulated in in the Greek is ego eimi. It's just I am. And so John traces this beautiful theme through his gospel where Jesus is talking. He says, "I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection. I am the life. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. I am the true vine." And he's saying these things, and it's connected to imagery from the Old Testament, and he's bringing all this together so that when you see Jesus in the pages of the Gospel of John, you see the Jesus standing before you as the God who became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That when you look to who you're called to be as a follower of Christ, you see the God who chose to become like us, to meet us where we are, to walk with us, and to take us to where he is. That this is the great mystery of the faith, that Jesus came down to then lift us up. And so we're going through this I am series, and we come to the John chapter 10, where he says, I'm the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. And the context for this comes right after one of my favorite stories in John, the healing of the blind man. And we looked at this a few weeks ago, that you have this blind man who is healed. And John holds him in contrast to the lame man who is healed, that the way they respond to Jesus, the way you believe, the way you respond to Jesus is determined by the direction that your feet go. And the lame man, when he finally is able to walk, his feet walk towards the temple, rejecting Jesus, looking for his acceptance in society. But the blind man, his feet are pointed only at Jesus. And wherever Jesus goes, he wants to go with him. But this debate breaks out, and it's one of my favorite stories because the dialogue between the Jewish leaders, the lawyers, the teachers of the law, and the blind man, they keep going back and forth, and the blind man just has this great line that we all know really well. I don't know if he's a sinner or not. All I know is this: I was blind, now I see. The proof is in the pudding. That's a loose translation of the Greek. He's saying, look, I was blind, but now I see, and all I want. And they said, well, you were steeped in sin at birth. Get out of the synagogue. And he says, okay. Because who does he find? Jesus finds him knowing that he was kicked out, and he says, do you believe in the one that is sent? In chapter 9, verse 38, it says, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him because Jesus had just told him, I am the Messiah. But the debate that was going on between the Jews and the blind man was simply this: who is Jesus? And this is the context that John writes chapter 10. The debate of who is Jesus? Who is this one who's doing these miracles, this one who is bringing all of these signs? Who is this guy? Is he the Messiah? Is he God in the flesh? Is he the Son of Man come to save us? Who is he? And it's in this question that Jesus decides to tell a parable. And in John chapter 10, verse 1, he starts by saying, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, and they do not know the voice of the strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. What does any of that have to do with the identity of Jesus and the debate between the Jews and the blind man? The blind man, or should I say the man formerly blind, I don't know why we always identify them by the negative characteristic when he was actually healed, but anyways, I digress. That the man who is formerly blind is saying he's got to be the Messiah or at least a prophet. And they're saying we're sons of Abraham. And they're looking for this identity of Jesus, and they come to question Jesus on who he is. And he starts talking about sheep and shepherds. And what he's doing is he's leaning on the Old Testament imagery of who the king is supposed to be. That Ezekiel chapter 37 paints this picture of a shepherd. And that this shepherd king is this image of the young boy David, who is a shepherd who became king. The man who is made after God's own heart, whose heart longed for God, that while he messed up time and time again, his heart was always orienting him back to God. But he was a shepherd king, that when you think about imageries of kings and rulers and presidents and CEOs and all the different types of rulers in the world, shepherd is not the kind of ruler you would look for. You would look for a warrior. You would look for someone who dominates. But this shepherd king is this ideal king of Israel. And so you remember passages like Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. When Jesus talks about a shepherd king, these are the images that are coming to mind: one who leads us into green pastures, one who takes care of us. But he also has in contrast thieves and robbers who come in by other ways. And he has the revolutionaries in mind. He has the warlords looking to bring confrontation with Rome. He has Herod and his family in mind who are colluding with the Roman Empire. The ones who say, we'll let you, keep ruling as long as you give us our cut. The politicians of the day that are offering power and position in the world by giving up their power and position to other people. They're abusing Israel for their own sake. He has all of them in mind because rulers that are looking for their own benefits are not the Messiah. Rulers that seek your allegiance and are benefiting from your allegiance, they are not God. They are not good shepherds. And so he tells this parable in contrast to the rulers of the world and the way they seek power over people. And he says, I am the good shepherd. And when you look at the early church in the first 3 centuries, when the church was in the margins of society and the church was oppressed, they met in catacombs. And in the catacombs of Rome, you can actually go and see some of the oldest images of Jesus, that when you think of the pictures of Jesus, these aren't the first pictures I come to. When I picture Jesus, I have all these different images, but the early church, the earliest depictions of Jesus that we see are a shepherd boy with a lamb on his shoulders. That in the catacombs, this picture is from the mid-3rd century. This next picture is from the 3rd or 4th century, and it's kind of the same image. You have Jesus, or you have a young shepherd leading the sheep. And the next one, this is the oldest picture we have depicting Jesus in Rome in the 2nd century. And again, it's a shepherd. That they're not worshiping images. Let's set that debate aside for a second. But what they're doing is they can't, in this time frame, give depictions of Christian imagery. And so they're actually borrowing pagan images of shepherds, and they're just putting them on the walls so that they don't, the Romans don't recognize Christian imagery. And they did a lot of these images kind of under the radar. But the earliest depictions of Jesus were a picture of a boy shepherd. It's a very non-threatening picture, but it's also a very comforting picture. That what the early Christians, when they were oppressed, when they were marginalized, and when they were killed for their faith, the picture that they always had in front of them was, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. That when the Roman Empire is shutting down your business because they found out that you're a Christ follower, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. And when I follow the shepherd, he takes me to green pastures. And when the Roman Empire is stealing your land, I follow the good shepherd. He takes me to green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. And when you think about oppression, when you see that your brothers and sisters are dying for the faith, when they're being put in coliseums for the entertainment to be killed and martyred, the good shepherd is the image they keep coming back to. They don't look for revelation where Jesus is on the horse with a sword in hand. No, they look for the one who guides them through the chaos and brings them into places of peace. Because I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. And so he uses this imagery to give us a picture of the one that we follow. He may not be the one that dominates our enemies like we want sometimes. He may not be the one that helps us overthrow the Roman Empire that we want sometimes. He's the one that always brings us into green pastures. He's the one who always brings us by quiet waters. He's the one that offers peace in a world of chaos. He's the one that leads us, that when everything in the world is taken away from us, you have the one thing that truly matters: a shepherd king. He unpacks this parable, and the first 5 verses are then unpacked, and he makes a couple points in chapter 10, verses 7 through 9, and then again in 10 through 18, and then he makes his third point in verses 25 through 30. That when he talks about who is Jesus as the good shepherd, this is what he says. Verse 7 says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, they will be saved and will go in and out and find good pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." And he goes on to paint this imagery of what it looks like, that when the world is in confrontation with Jesus, and Jesus is confronting the world and the power struggles, and who's going to determine what is good and what is evil in the world, and the fight is breaking out between the powers of the world and the powers of Jesus, what weapon does Jesus reach for in the struggle? He reaches for the cross. He says, I will conquer evil through radical forms of love. That to win the battle of the powers of this world is only done in one way, and that's to let go of power altogether and to hold on to the one power that truly matters, power that is not of this world. To embrace the cross and to be sacrificial, to love in the way that Jesus loved. In verse 16, he goes on to say that I have other sheep that are not of this fold, and it's a reminder that sometimes we get so narrow in our thinking about who belongs in and who belongs out, and we draw lines in the sand and to determine who's in and who's out. And Jesus reminds us, as the good shepherd, he has flocks that are coming in that you know nothing about. And so what does it look like for us to be people who remove the lines in the sand and embrace people who come to the table, all who want to come, that we welcome them with the love of Jesus? And so who are the people that when you see them within the pen, that you would rather kick them out than embrace them as sheep? And these are the questions that we have to ask as we gather around the table, recognizing the I am as the good shepherd. He goes on to talk about, in chapter 10, verse 25, it says, Jesus answered them, I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me, but you do not believe because you are not among my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand, because I and the Father are one. And all throughout this text, as you go back and you read through it, he mentions a few times that the sheep know his voice. It is the sheep who know the voice, and they know the name of Jesus, and Jesus knows the sheep by name, and they have a relationship. And he paints a picture that to be a follower of Jesus, you have to be so familiar with his voice that when counter voices come in, you know the difference between the voice of Jesus and the voice of others. And in this contrast of who is the Messiah, who is the leader of Israel, Jesus starts with this parable about thieves and robbers and the true shepherd. And he's countering the house of Herod. He's countering the politicians. He's countering the lawyers. He's countering the teachers. He's countering all the people who are not the voice of Jesus. And there's a lot of voices in this world. There's a lot of voices in this world that want to convince you that it's the voice of Jesus. The voices of this world say power and might make right. If you don't have power, do what you can to get it. If someone has power over you, you take it back from them and you suppress them. If you have power over other people and they rise up, you put them down because you have to have power. Wealth is the measure of success. God cares about your happiness, so do what makes you happy. Have you heard these images, these messages of the world, and they creep into the church and they creep into our lives as the messages of Jesus? And so I want to encourage us, church, to know the voice of Jesus so well that when you hear voices of the world, when you hear preachers get up and tell you what Jesus is saying, that you know when it's Ryan speaking and you know when it's Jesus speaking. And we've been talking a lot about spiritual formation and developing habits of spiritual formation, that if you spend more time listening to the media than reading God's word, you're hearing voices that aren't Jesus. And I'm not saying the media is this group of media. I'm talking about all media, social media, liberal media, conservative media, moderate media, whatever media. If you're listening to the TV, if you're listening to the internet, if you're whatever, if you're not settled in the Word of God on a regular basis to have peace in a world of chaos, then you're listening to voices that aren't Jesus. And so you have to develop regular routines of hearing the voice of Jesus, to be silent in the presence of God and to listen to what God is speaking to you, to be transformed more into his image. Every Sunday, I have a practice that before I leave the house, I pray that God will speak through me and that I will be out of the way of God's voice as I give a word to the church. It's a practice I do every Sunday to remind myself of a place of humility as being the person who speaks to the people, with the people, and for the people in the presence of God. And I could tell you a lot of things this morning that Jesus says, but what I would like to do is just read the words of Jesus for you. And I've put the scriptures behind me that if you want to write those down and look at them later, go for it. I just want to read the words of Jesus. This is a short list because Jesus says so much more, but these are the messages that I feel like myself and we as a church need to hear continually as we listen to the voice of Jesus, because the voices of the world counter these voices. So I'm just going to read you the voice of Jesus. A new command I give you: love one another. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. And then after telling them a lot of hard things that are going to happen to them in this life, Jesus then says, I told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. In Mark 8 through 10, Jesus 3 times talks about being crucified and then being raised from the dead. And these are the 3 things he says in conjunction with those promises. It says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for anyone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? And what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes to his Father's glory with the holy angels. Later, sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be last and a servant to all. And then he took a child whom he placed among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. Later, Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them, but not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. At one point, when he was asked what the greatest commands were, he said, the most important one is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all of your strength. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. There are no commandments greater than these. Another time, Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? 7? Jesus answered him, I tell you, not 7, but 70 times 7. And in this beautiful parable in Matthew 25, where he talks about whatever you did to feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, to take care of the needs of other, he says this: whatever you did or did not do for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did or did not do for me. One of the places I go to often to hold up a mirror to my life in my struggles with following Jesus, I always come back to the Sermon on the Mount. And I want to end with just a couple of readings from the Sermon on the Mount. And then I'm going to end with the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, because the end of the Sermon on the Mount is the key for understanding how seriously to take Jesus in this. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And anyone who has a word of contempt and says to their brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of them at the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way. Or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge will hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you've paid the last penny. You've heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. And give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? If you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Do not store up for yourself treasures in heaven, or treasures on earth. I should clarify that one. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. If your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? I'm going to skip down to, do not judge others, or you too will be judged. For the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. But why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And he ends his sermon with this. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundations on the rock. But anyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rains came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. Church, let's hear the words of the Good Shepherd, and let's know his voice well so that we may follow him. Donald, come and prepare us for communion.